folks, it's that time of the month again, the time where I have to resort to my handy-dandy list to figure out what I'm going to review next. Ha! And you thought it was just at random. Well, technically it's a little random. Got my D12. I know, it doesn't get a lot of play. So, here we go. Son of a bitch! Number 12 is No Game, No Life. So, well, at least I can scribble Kashan back on here. So, I guess that means you know what's next. Though, frankly, I don't really know how I'm supposed to review No Game, No Life. I mean, it's all a bunch of lowly pandering, nerd-loving bullshit with 11-year-old ass in it and...
Oh, good. My slow clap processor made it into this thing, so we have that.
Oh, Patreon alert. So, according to this, I have just been asked to review Berserk. So, big shout out to Jocelyn of Jazz Anime Reviews for saving my bacon in this particular time of need. Ugh. So, if you want to make me dance like your disgusting meat puppet, you can head on down to my Patreon, which you can find right here, and toss me a couple of bucks. And, yeah, I will dance like your little marionette. Isn't that lovely? So, on with the show. Take it away, me. Warning, this anime is bloody as all hell. Berserk is a dark fantasy anime set during the war between the Tudor and the Midland Empires, and revolves primarily around the Black Swordsman Guts. The series follows his adventures with the Band of the Hawk, led by Griffith and co-captained by Casca. At least that's what the premise of the anime is. The story in the manga is far, far different. Guts comes from a rough background, and when we first meet him, the first thing he does is viciously murder a group of thugs with an arm-mounted crossbow. Clearly, he's the kind of person who doesn't mess around with introductions. No, Guts is not the kind of guy to mince words, and most of what he does is kill people in gory and brutal ways. His is a very nasty world, and he is a very nasty character. However, he is on a mission in the initial episode to go find Griffith again. So when it cuts back to several years prior for the rest of the show, it seems like a bit of whiplash. Guts' defining visual trait is that he wields a comically large sword that may as well have a sign on it that says, "Just try building it, cosplayers." When we meet him as a kid, he's not far removed from his adult counterpart, just shorter and less stocky. And over the course of the series, which goes over a few years, he goes from being something of a wild dog of a warrior to a more disciplined commander of men who cares about the people that he's fighting with. You know, between the moments when he's slicing people in half. Yes, that blade is not something you want to get hit with, and it causes a rather messy death when some poor sap gets smashed with it. This is a source of contention for Guts, because he feels like all he's really good for is smashing people into paste. This is a fair conceit. The rest of his company has all sorts of dreams and ambitions, and he frankly does not. He may be our main character, but he's not precisely what one could consider heroic. If this was a more traditional anime, then our hero would probably be Griffith. He's elegant, graceful, driven, and is a master swordsman. Sadly, he also has the same problem that plagues so many ambitious characters in that his grasp exceeds his reach. Seemingly invincible in battle, his battle plans are some of the most exacting and effective in recent in-universe history. This may or may not be due to an amulet he wears called a behelit, but more on that later. I don't know why anyone would ever think that getting a behelit is a good idea. I mean, look at it. It's disgusting. It's like suddenly seeing a box of hot dogs in your room. Vaguely threatening. Griffith is also not in great standing with the nobility as the series goes on, leading to Game of Thrones-like intrigue. Except unlike Game of Thrones, Berserk doesn't belabor the point with its politicking nearly so much. If I was writing this review about 6 years ago, I'd have said it's hard to compare it to other things, but thanks to Game of Thrones, it's much easier to draw that parallel. Berserk has better pacing, and is far less willing to kill off characters for the sake of shock, but ultimately has very similar thematic ideas. The trials of leadership,
questionable morality, the depths that humans can sink to, some really freaky visuals, and a penchant for extreme violence. While there is always a protagonist, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of heroics from our heroes, which kind of makes sense given their role in the universe. While a heroic character may kill on occasion or out of necessity, the characters in Berserk are trained soldiers, and their express duty is to make enemy forces less alive. Don't go looking for tales of knightly daring do. This is a messy affair where no one gets out clean. It has this pretty spectacular way of building up its characters to a point, and then completely and utterly destroying them. No one escapes without some sort of battle damage, be it mental or physical. And frankly, I think the physical damage in this case is easier to deal with. It should be noted that the first episode shows precisely the state of the world, and then the rest of the series shows the lead up to this state. Considering how many volumes of the manga there are, this is a little frustrating, and the series itself kicked off in 1989. This anime came out in 1997, and just now they've got another anime on the way? We'll be waiting a long time for any more of this show, that's for sure. In spite of all that, we can see that the world goes straight to hell at some point during the series. We as the audience get to see things before it all goes all sorts of wrong, and brother, as someone who's looked only a little bit ahead in the series, let me tell you, it gets real ugly. That's kind of the only mark on this show that I can really think of offhand. It just doesn't end. That used to be a bigger problem, of course, considering there weren't any further seasons scheduled, and when it comes right down to it, considering where the series goes, the anime comes off pretty tame in comparison. It's a 25-episode series that, by and large, doesn't get to the meat of the story. While it does admirably set up the characters, knowing how much Berserk there is down the road does kind of make the anime feel like an afterthought. It is just a drop in the bucket comparatively. The intrigue and assassination plot lines are very nice and all, but it's not really what the core of Berserk as a whole is about. However, since it takes up the lion's share of the anime, that's what we get, and thankfully it makes for some really interesting viewing, in spite of it being so far removed from its manga counterpart. The characters aren't exactly what you'd call deep either. They're surprisingly understated, but at the same time, this is not the show you're going into for scintillating character development. Guts, for the most part, is very much defined by what he's in opposition to quote, getting wrapped up in someone else's dream, for example. Griffith is the sort of character where his ambition is his biggest downfall, and his lust for control and power extends over other people, too. This may be what drew the Behelit to him in the first place, as its full purpose is to consume humans in a moment of weakness and turn them into rampaging hellbeasts. And for Casca, the devoted and confident lady captain, well, everything that could go wrong goes wrong for her. Probably her lowest moment, without getting into later specifics, was when she finds herself temporarily weakened on the battlefield when she starts menstruating. Has mangaka Kentaro Miura ever met a woman who's on her period? I certainly wouldn't want to go against them with a sword in their hand. Still, she arguably gets the worst of it in the series, and it makes the whole series just feel that much more nasty. The animation holds up surprisingly well, but it's also due in no small part to clever usage of budget. Maximum impact with minimal animation is what they were aiming for, and they made the show look pretty close to its manga counterpart. The manga itself is pretty detailed, of course, and it would be easy to make this version look generic and dull to save money. And while it may not maintain all of the shading in places, the animation never goes comically off-model, and the designs are properly kept up. This looks like it should belong with the rest of Berserk. Sure, it may not move very much in certain scenes, but it does what it's supposed to do. This is one of those shows when you get done watching it and just say, poor everyone involved. Anime doesn't really go this direction very often, and when it does, it's rarely done in such a way that I don't immediately call it out as trying too hard. Berserk does it fairly effortlessly, and it doesn't feel like it's in one of those, ow, the edge sort of ways. It's well worth the watch, and while you may honestly be better off getting the manga to read for a more complete story, I don't feel like anyone would really feel like they wasted their time with this. The only question nowadays is how easy it is to actually get, but with the new season on the way, it should be markedly easier in the near future. I suppose I should cap this video off by saying that it's really hard to make a review about a show that so many people have already taken shots at, especially when it's generally quite good, if a little rough around the edges. And sadly, I can't really talk about the way the plot turns because there's only one big turn and it's at the end of the show. So yes, this is more than a little truncated because spoilers for a show that came out in 1997. Now, obviously, the show isn't going to tickle everyone's fancy, especially for those of you who are apparently allergic to older animation and shows without high schools in them, but for those of us who remember the dark ages of anime, this one will always have a soft spot in our hearts.
Well, so that's all I have to really say about Berserk. It's good. It's really gory. It's really dark, especially at the end, which we're keeping under wraps and very hush-hush. But as far as No Game, No Life is concerned, let me just throw it to you this way. I would review anything for love. Yes, I'd review anything for love. I'd review anything for love.